So welcome everybody. Welcome to the latest Jon and Jane Talks webinar. I'm Jon Sidwick from Maverick AV Solutions, and I purposely said Jon first because I'd like to introduce Jane. Jane, would you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you, Jon. Yeah, it's normally Jane and Jon talks too, but I'll let you off because you're talking first. So Jane Hammersley, and I am responsible for the collaboration solutions within Maverick and also the global alliances for vendors and resellers. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you very much. This week we're Jane and I are looking at the current global pandemic and how it's affecting the industry that we're in now, but more importantly, where are we going to end up when we leave the pandemic in the next few, whatever it is, weeks or months, as we start to move through it? What is the industry going to look like, and what can we do now to prepare ourselves for that future? I'm really pleased to have two exceptional guests to contribute to that. We have Sean Wargo, who's the Senior Director of Market Intelligence at Avixa. Hi, Sean. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Sean is Avixa, for those I'm sure everybody knows, is the industry association, and I'm also proud to be a director of Avixa. A previous director and chairman of Avixa also joins us. It's the SVP for Global Workplace Solutions. I believe that's your new title at AVI-SPL. Julian Phillips. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much, and glad to be here, everybody. And as you probably noticed, for those of you that know me, you probably haven't seen me with any kind of facial hair before. It's amazing what these pandemics will do to people.
Makes you look far more handsome, I'm sure. Well, that's so you tell yourself that, or the mirror tells you that. So to start with, Sean, you've been doing some incredible surveys with the channel. I watch your Friday podcast and broadcast on what those results are, and really interesting. And you've got most probably one of the best snapshots of the industry that's around at the moment. So what are those snapshots telling you? What is the AV industry telling you about the current impact that we're feeling?
Sure, just a little backdrop on that. So we decided pretty much on the closure of a lot of international travel and restrictions here in the US side in particular, we decided to launch that survey out to our membership on a weekly basis just to kind of get the pulse and also give people a chance to kind of share their experiences. And certainly there's no way to sugarcoat it. I mean, when we look at providers in the channel, which I'm sure Julian can elaborate on, they're particularly telling us, they're hard hit, high percentage majority are seeing negative impacts. And then we ask, of course, what kinds of impacts those are. What's risen through the weeks in particular is revenue reduction or lost revenue. Week to week, we're seeing about 25% among those that are saying 25% revenue reduction among those that are saying they're seeing loss of revenue. When you extrapolate that out, it's probably about 15% on average, week to week. We did have a couple months of growth. January, February were strong, March terrible. So we also do a business index every month that looks month over month at sales. And that, for the first time in its 2.5-year history, is now showing an industry in decline versus an industry kind of growing. So, of course, the topic of today is germane. What does it look like going forward? How do we get out of this? But for now, certainly that's the impact we're seeing is a loss of channel revenues for sure.
And Julian, is that something that is replicated in AVI-SPL?
Yes, for those that have been following the story, we had a fairly momentous event in February with Whitlock and AVI-SPL merging. And then almost immediately, as soon as that was started, the process, we then obviously got hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've had almost like a double whammy of things to deal with. What has been fascinating, and I think, Sean, the data from Avixa follows this up, is that actually January, February were very good months. So we had a great start to the year. And I think partly because of the momentum that actually carried through from the previous year. March has taken a little bit of a hit, but overall, surprisingly, Q1 actually came out okay. I think the real forecast right now is that what's going to happen in April, May, and June. And obviously, we've had challenges in being able to actually build and sustain pipeline. We've been very lucky. There's very few projects that have been cancelled. Most of what we're seeing are delays and things being pushed out. So the longer term pipeline looks okay. But we are going to have to actually plan for a certain amount of softness certainly installation revenues. But there again, it's been a little bit mixed. So we've seen very strong demand for telesales, online sales. You know, as you have seen at Maverick, everyone is buying webcams and things for home communications. We've actually seen a lot of activity for certain customers because we've been deemed as an essential business, which is great news for the AV industry, but a lot of us have actually been deemed as essential because video communication is so important right now, is that whilst our customers have actually not been in their offices, through following the right procedures and what have you, we've actually got installation teams actually being able to install stuff without any hindrance or any display. So there are certain parts of the business that are very, very busy. And we've certainly seen demand in managed services and trying to support cloud services and what have you. And we've been shifting things around. But overall, there's no doubt that there is an impact to revenue for Q2. But the longer term prospects, and we'll talk about it later, are still looking good.
I think it's a really interesting point. Just coming back to that, because we've been looking internally at, you know, we can see what's in front of us now, we're experiencing what's now, but what does Q3 and Q4 look like? We don't want to make any rush plans now that could affect those. And I guess, let me ask you first, Julian, but Sean, please feel free to comment, is what particular areas of your business are you seeing that are challenged? So personal collab is looking good at the moment. What sort of area of the business is really looking challenged at the moment? And what projects are you seeing moving out? So just comment.
I think the nature of our business is that a lot of what we do is involved with large customers that are deploying projects over a long period of time. So we're sort of in the middle of multi-phase deployments. And I think certainly there's been certain transaction behavior has slowed down a little bit. But those longer term projects with the enterprise customers, they're still going to happen. It's more of a case of actually when it's going to happen and when we have availability to get access and be able to do that. So I think overall, because of the nature of the business that we do, I think a lot of it is just pushing out. But what we are seeing is some fascinating behavior starting to come back from customers that is actually saying, we now need to accelerate. So when we do go back, that plan that we had, let's say for Microsoft Teams, that we might have actually had a finish date in 2021, do you know what? We need to get this now finished in 2020.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to happen when we return is that most organizations are going to realize that they weren't really prepared for the dramatic shift in the use of the tool sets that they are now become very dependent on. And there are certain aspects of that preparedness that they've now felt a little bit exposed by. And I think we've seen examples of where organizations maybe had 10% of their workforce that were remote workers have suddenly pivoted to 90% plus. And that realization that it's not just around the technology, it's around business process, it's about practice, behavior, disciplines, those kind of things that they now need to plan for. So I think what's going to happen when we return is not just fulfilling the backlog of what we haven't been able to do. I think there's going to be a real drive to try and accelerate a lot of the deployments, especially around cloud deployments and that migration into those key platforms.
Yeah.
Just on that point about is it, because it's an interesting one, is it access stopping you doing it now? Or is it something, or is it cash, or is it decision making? Because that's a big question we're getting from a lot of the channel is, you know, what is stopping people doing it now if people are going to need it now?
Well, I mean, I'll just give my perspective and pass back to Sean. Yeah. But I think let's all be realistic right now. Is that this event has triggered a global recession. There isn't a single economy that isn't going to be making less money than it did in the previous year. So I think in the general rules of recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, I think that is something that we're all going to face. So I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty about what, as with any recession, about whether we should actually go ahead and invest at a time when we need to be pulling in the horns and, you know, revenues are repressed. Having said that, I think the AV industry has proven itself over many, many years and decades to be relatively recession-proof. Mm-hmm. And I think in one respect, and I know Avixa's data backs this up, is that actually, as we saw in 9/11, I think there will be a focus on using the technology that we actually provide. And I can actually see this as potentially being a positive thing. I think if there's going to be any negativity, I think a lot of businesses probably might slow down their investment in real estate and making big investments in new buildings and what have you. But I think technology deployment, is still going to be strong.
Sean, does that resonate with your facts?
Yeah, for sure. It's something that we talked about. We do a quarterly series of macroeconomic reports, and one of them that we've done in the past year or so has been on that recession proofing in our industry. The key aspect of that is, in the past, people had thought that our industry was very reliant on new construction, that you look at construction variables and to try to forecast then what happens in Pro AV. And it's actually not quite the case. It's actually a significant amount of a remodel, refurbish, et cetera. As Julian was talking about, managed contracts to provide upgrades in existing space. And that kind of makes sense when you look at landscape of real estate out there. So an example of this, in last recession, based upon the data we can kind of glean from what was happening, construction took a 30% hit. So, you would expect then, if we were completely tied to it as an industry, we would have declined in similar fashion. We did not. We were, single digit point declines as far as we can tell in the past recession. So as Julian notes, as we head into potential recession period, we won't know it until we're actually far into it, but certainly the indicators are declines for 1, if not 2 quarters. So we'll see how that plays out. But where we're robust is we have this ability to shift both across vertical markets. So as we're talking about, some vertical markets will do better than others. We shift to remodeling, refurbishing. Hopefully this accelerates some of the trend towards managed services. I think I'm very interested in this phenomenon. I think all of us have talked about this in the past, one-off or in public forum, about the need for thinking long-term in terms of recurring in terms of your revenue opportunity with your client, not just project to project, but how you bridge that gap and actually extend the relationship through time. So now we're seeing the need for integrators and providers to think about how can they accelerate that growth? How can they accelerate that change to become more intrinsically linked to and involved with their client, even through periods where maybe access to space is limited, the ability to invest in large venue or big installation may be limited. So how do we still nurture and help our companies move along the path of technology and do so from a remote fashion? That to me is perhaps one of the key opportunities as we go forward. Even as Jane kind of talked about in terms of areas of decline, we have to put a nod out to live events. I mean, obviously, with trade shows on hold, concerts on hold, any sort of mass gatherings on hold, live events has just gone from 100 miles per hour to 0 in the space of a short period of time. And we see that in our surveys. It's not just 50% declines in revenue, it's down to nothing. So that's going to take time. I think where I am disappointed in my fellow futurists and forecasters is, boy, storm clouds dominate right now. So in the midst of the storm, everything looks really bleak, and that we're not going to return to any sense of normalcy, or that trade shows are completely dead is sort of some of the narrative out there. And while we all agree it's a slow return, there are intrinsic benefits to some of those formats that, sure, we may change what those look like through time, but I would be reluctant as a forecaster to say from our perch today, which is from a very negative position, that all that stuff stays gone. I think that it's just a matter of when and are we ready for when it comes back online and how it looks in light of more virtualization and the need for that remote access to content. That's something we'll have to be positioned for, but we do believe that the storm clouds clear and business opens back up even in some of those hard hit areas.
That's interesting. We got a question from a Scott who's looking and says he's saying, well, there's a lot of paralysis in the market at the moment where people aren't, critical hiring has stopped, especially around even in the UC remote collaboration space. And it's a great point here. They say, how do we collectively shake ourselves out of this? How do we, or is it the right thing to do? But I do see a lot of that. People are kind of like rabbits in the headlights. You know, what do we do to really look forward at the future and say there is a good future and make sure that we start building to that?
I think, and again, just my perspective on what I'm reading and seeing is that most economic forecasters have been talking about the prospect of a short, sharp recession at some point in the near future. And I think what this event has done is effectively now created that event, but the whole world is going through it together at exactly the same time. And most recessions don't work that way. They tend to have a rolling effect over a longer period of time and different people. So what I think is happening is that effectively we are going through this collective recessionary period as through necessity. But actually, I think in many ways, when we come out of it, it's almost as if it's like a new start, that we can actually focus on what are the things that we now need to get done to really kick the economy back up again. So I have an optimism, is that when we get through this, and we are probably talking about late summer before I guess we're going to return to any kind of normal type behavior from a business perspective, I still feel that we're going to be in a very strong position to not just continue and catch up with where we left off, but to actually accelerate a lot of those programs. So answering Scott in particular is, I think those organizations that were planning their UC platform deployments are going to have to accelerate that, and they're going to need resources and expertise and capability. They certainly are going to need support from the integrator and the managed services community out there. They do not have that skill set internally, a lot of them, or they certainly don't have enough of it right now. And so I think the role of the channel, both from an integrator, service provider, a consultant, and a distributor and manufacturer, is going to be very critical. Some of the things that are actually holding us back a little bit, we have a certain amount of uncertainty about supply chain at the moment. So, you know, clearly some of the key tools that we actually rely on to do this, we still don't have clarity about where supply chain is. So, you know, partnerships with distributors like Maverick are really important. And we talked about, you know, what are the kind of things that we're concerned about. When you're doing long-term project deployments, the supply chain of all these different devices and what have you becomes a critical component in how you actually forecast how you do the deployment and labor resources and what have you. So if we might have the demand, we might have our people ready to go, but if we don't have the product, that's going to be a concern. So there's a number of factors that we all collectively need to address. Up until now, we haven't really seen significant issues with supply chain. You know, most, apart from your webcams out there and all the other things. But I think as we get into May, June, July, I think we might see some constraint in certain areas. It'd be interesting to see what your views are.
We're seeing that, and I'm very interested in the distributor perspective on this too. I know we're seeing it in our data. So week to week, the percentage that are listing a supply chain constraint as a concern has gone up. Which is somewhat surprising to us. We had heard of certainly early on of supply chain issue as China shut down factory, and so supply of certain products, LED video, other larger products, was constrained for a period of time. We thought that was sort of phase one of the pandemic issue, is more supply that opens back up, and so we're relieved of it. But in fact, the data is now showing providers are highlighting this as an area of concern. So it says to me, as Julian's kind of calling out, there are perhaps unforeseen challenge areas. Maybe it's USB cams, maybe it's other sorts of audio equipment, or things that are produced in areas that are now being hard hit. That's something that's coming through in our data.
Okay, that's a really good point. And as a distributor, of course, our main function in life is to have the right products in stock at the right time for when our partners need them. And we can only do that if vendors have produced them and got them over from China or wherever. But back to you, Julian, what else can we be doing as your partner distributor in this? You know, we all want to support you. What else can we do apart from make sure we get you the right products? Is there anything else that we could be supporting you with?
I'm sure there are many people from within the channel on the call right now, so hopefully my words will resonate with them. But like every business, cash is king, and there's a multifaceted nature to this. Number one, customers, because they're just not in the business, are not necessarily paying their bills as quickly as they would do. Second of all, obviously revenues are starting to be impacted, so you're not collecting as much money. And also some of the things that we've been doing to try and actually measure that is, whereas we might have done early pay discounts, for example, for our supply chain, we might be just holding onto our cash a little bit more. So it does actually have a flow down effect. So I think one of the things that we have to be prepared for is the fact there isn't as much liquidity in the channel as there was. And therefore we're going to have to rethink a little bit about, how we're planning to use our cash in paying vendors and all the rest of it. So there's a number of different factors. And I think the channel can help with regards to potentially, certainly for a lot of smaller integrators, extending longer term payment terms, maybe being a little bit more flexible in credit limits.
Yep.
Helping to actually provide maybe leasing solutions or finance solutions that we might actually help to actually collect money earlier by using some of that capital that actually is still in very high supply out there in the market. And maybe this is the opportunity for us to finally get to grips with AV as a service. And actually, because it's been a pain trying to make this happen, but maybe this is the trigger that we actually have. What's interesting is we do provide AV as a service, and I've seen a huge uptick in requests for proposal in the last few weeks for this, as customers are holding on to their cash and saying, well, okay, I still need to move ahead, but I'm not actually wanting to use my cash. I might have use somebody else's cash to do that. So I think innovation will come out of this, and it will actually be a little bit of a kick up the backside for a lot of us that actually is actually much needed for us to actually advance some of the things that we've been doing.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Warren Buffett in this, for those that sort of follow the stock market, of, when others are afraid, you get bold, and when others are bold, you get afraid. And so I think that this is a good example of that time where what better time, especially, with workforces on furlough and layoffs. I mean, that sort of, we can call it idle hands, but you could also call it inspiration and opportunity for innovation and creativity. A kick in the pants, as Julian said, is a way to sort of right-size yourself and look at opportunity. I think the other side of that is overreacting to near-in phenomenon. So retooling your business in entirely different directions. So this is where the futurist view is kind of important, that if we over forecast that, let's say, everybody always is now only going to work from home, or nobody's going to go out to eat, sporting events are dead, it's all going to be broadcast, then you start to move in a certain direction, and maybe you're not well positioned as you come out of it. So it is important to start looking at, well, where is there kind of demand, and responding to that, innovating in new ways, but not getting paralyzed or sort of pulling back too much for, say, key opportunities. I will say we're seeing in our survey too, the cash is king story is really important there. Getting money into the hands of people fast enough is certainly the efforts that governments are trying to do. We're seeing about 47% of our respondents in the survey are taking advantage of the small business and sort of government-funded business loan types of programs like the CARES Act in the United States. But the other thing that's very real is certainly furloughing staff, trying to make do with cash reserves, cutting salaries. Those are all real parts of what's going on too, between 35 and 45% of providers saying they're taking advantage of any or doing any one of those actions. So I would echo that point of how do we get, say, cash in hand to try to help companies innovate and emerge from this.
So looking at this, it seems, the two big things, or three big things, is obviously information. Make sure stocking information so we can make sure that whatever business is out there, we can fuel it, and also enough cash to keep it turning. And I absolutely agree with you, Julian. I mean, the AV as a service or technology as a service story has got to be, as people move forward and they need to invest in these products, going from a truly CapEx environment to a truly OpEx environment has to be high up on the agenda. So looking forward, there's a great question from our friend Dana at Avacor. Is it related to our industry? What verticals or industries do you see coming faster with more energy that we should be focused on? Basically, if we're going to be chasing the dollars, which verticals are those dollars going to be sitting in? Good one for you, Julian.
Well, it's probably a good one for
Sean. Go on, Sean.
He's probably got great data, but let me give you the anecdotal stuff from what I'm seeing as far as our customer base is concerned. There is, by the way, the comment on live events. It isn't all doom and gloom in live events. So AVISPL has a company called VideoLink, which has been exceptionally busy right now because they're doing virtualized events and producing commencements for universities virtually, doing live events virtually. So I do see a shift here for the live event community to actually virtualize events, and I think that's going to drive a lot of demand both for technology and post and pre and post production services. And I think the live event community can take advantage of that. I think that healthcare clearly is in a not just on the provider side at the front line, but actually the biotech and the pharmaceutical industry is going through overdrive at the moment. And, you know, they see technology as and collaboration technology in particular as an accelerator for their business and much needed. So I think that's something that is definitely happening. Interestingly, the banks are very active right now, and the financial services market, I think, again, as they have seen the disruption in the fintech market, is a realization that the virtual enablement and the digitization of their business and their business model is vitally important. So I think finance is going to be strong. Clearly, obviously, often the financial services providers in a recessionary time are the ones that pull in the horns traditionally, but I don't necessarily see that they will do that as far as technology spend is concerned. I see overall, I don't think there's one particular vertical that is under threat. I mean, obviously, when oil price declines, then the energy market traditionally pulls back, but I think that's a temporary situation. I think all the forecasters on oil is that we'll return to some sense of $50 a barrel at some point this year. So I think the key is, rather than necessarily making knee-jerk reactions and either shifting to or moving away from certain verticals, go and talk to your customers and find out what's happening, be as close and as intimate as you possibly can be, and don't wait for the phone to ring. You have to get out there and actually
make it happen.
Make it happen.
Sean, is Julian's feedback backed up with what you see?
Absolutely. I think so. One way to look at it is, as we've been talking about, is first think about solution areas, and then what is the intersection between vertical markets and solution areas. It's something we've been looking a lot at over the last few months based upon data we even had prior to the pandemic. And certainly conference and collaboration on steroids, accelerated right now, lots of investment, lots of focus that providers are expecting. That's not just 6 months, that's beyond 6 months. So then you start to look at conference and collaboration and what vertical markets were already planning to or now seeing acceleration of investment. And so we have the large one we call corporate, but that really cuts across many. So office space, the kinds of collaboration technology that's needed for remote work, all those sorts of things. So yes, corporate remains a focal point. But right behind that is actually think about the industry that's actually going through perhaps the most disruption in a lot of ways, higher education. So gosh, I mean, those organizations are now forced with spooling up not just 20-30% of their coursework material and classes into online. It's 100% for this current semester, summer semester, and now plans are being made just to be prepared. And if we have to do the fall semester in online, to be ready for that. So I think companies that are looking at higher ed and sort of following that and talking to their customers and helping them manage that migration and future-proofing for, even just the new normal of, if more of the classrooms are available, more of the classes are available online, how we support that. There's some great solutions out there. Some of them look like control rooms for professors to kind of be surrounded by the technology and actually interact with students in a much more engaging way. So I would point to higher ed education generally as a hotbed opportunity. There's some, it'll take a little longer for hospitality, transportation, but those are areas where we're seeing strong interest in conference and collaboration too. Healthcare is near in and now. That's certainly something where there was investments happening both in the collaboration technology and distance medicine, telemedicine as an aspect of that takes on renewed importance in this opportunity where people still need to interact with their care provider and are wanting to do that via secure, HIPAA compliant, regulation compliant types of interfaces where you don't have to worry about a Zoom bomb coming in and disrupting your interaction. So to me, those are the big ones, certainly higher ed, corporate, healthcare, near in, and then farther out, we start to see some of the return to other as well. And live events, so the other solution area to watch that we're seeing kind of pop, as Julian kind of highlighted, pre-post production, live event companies looking at how can I be involved in content distribution, systems that allow them to optimize content, redistribute it out. I think we're going to see some interesting business models come out. Before, there was probably this reluctance for trade show attendees or conference attendees to pay for the streaming aspect. But this new, the new situation kind of forces our hand in that. If we want events to continue, then we're probably going to need to be willing to pay for some of that kind of streaming aspects. So event producers and live events companies can capitalize on some of that opportunity as that monetization opens up. And I do see that happening.
I love your positive aspects on that, Sean. It's a case of you're definitely a glass half full person. All of these verticals to go at, and I would absolutely agree with you on the corporate collaboration. It's an area we've been playing in for quite some time, obviously, but one of our colleagues remarked the other day that he believes even those adoptees, those organizations that were into corporate collaboration, it's advanced their thinking and their culture by 10 years because they've kind of been forced to move everybody into that space. Just thinking about a cultural shift, and Julian, I think you alluded to this earlier, when we go back to work, it's not going to be, wow, everybody can work from home now because we've proved it. How are we going to help orgs to make that cultural leap, change, or it's going to be an evolvement, I guess. How, in your mind, what can we do to support them?
Well, I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to answer it by just building on what Sean was talking about on the sort of event production side of things, because I think there's a new normal that will actually start to happen in the corporate world. And that is, if you think about the way that the broadcast industry has shifted and changed over the last 10 years and moved to on-demand, recorded, distributed content, I think the corporate world is going to basically accept that they now have to be an enterprise broadcaster. Because if you actually think about the way that information has actually been disseminated in the corporate world, the need that we've now been thrust into to actually broadcast your sales conferences, your meetings, your town halls, and all these kind of things. And I think a lot of organizations have started to realize they're not really being ready to do that, and they've scrambled to be able to do that. So I think one of the cultural changes is that I think organizations will start to look at their content and start to try and get more organized in how they actually manage their content assets, how they can actually distribute and broadcast their content to different kinds of groups, whether it be their employees, very importantly, and a realization that how do I keep engagement with my employees that might be working from home? How do I engage with my customers? How do I engage with my supply chain and my partners? So I think we're going to see a big investment in effectively enterprise broadcast. And I think that's part of the resilience a lot of organizations will invest in. So if integrators and the channel is looking at new opportunities that will come out of this, I think that's one in particular. I think from a cultural aspect, part of my role in global workplace is to actually not just look at technology, but to actually try and understand what's happening as far as what the architects are thinking and the workplace strategists and what have you. And I'm starting to actually see some revisionism now in what people are talking about what the workplace is actually going to look like and how we're organized in the workplace. So I don't think fundamentally we're going to see a massive shift in some of the changes we've made. So, a lot of people have already been railing against open open plan work styles and moving away from your own individual offices, I really do not believe we're going to see a return to everybody in their own individual office where they're completely screened away from any other individual. I think what will happen is this realization that human connection and people spending time together is really a special moment and should not be a wasted opportunity. And I think if we think about some of the behaviors that we've endured over the last few weeks, in many ways it's been liberating, because I haven't actually had to sit in endless, mindless meetings where nothing gets agreed and nothing happens. And I think this realization that we can conduct a lot of the things that we need to do from home or virtually, but when we do get together as teams, let's celebrate that and actually make a real event out of it. So I think what will happen is that when we're thinking about the workplace, we're going to put more effort, time, and money into investing in great experiences when people do come together, so that you can get the most out of it, rather than just providing space where people occupy. And so I think that's going to be, again, as an optimist, I will actually think that there will be a shift and focus much more on the experience that we have when we bring people together, but also a higher level of investment in people working from home. There is absolutely no doubt that we have to provide a tool set and an infrastructure and a support for people to work pretty seamlessly, whether they're sat in their home office with a beach behind them right now, using the tools that they actually have, as if they had the same tool set and the same support as they did in the office. Clearly, that opens up a whole range of challenges about quality of service, about security, about securing data on the edge of the network, all of these kind of things. And so there's no end of opportunity for things for us to do. But I think we all should expect that the workplace post COVID-19 is going to be different. And hopefully it will be a better different.
So we need some magic sauce from you two guys. I mean, sorry, Mike Stead asked a question from the GPA around, what the bellwethers are in terms of space utilization. I think you've answered that really well, Julian. So right, magic sauce, what do we need? Where are the areas now that are going to make a big difference in 3 months' time, that we sit here in 3 months and say, doing that fundamentally helped all of our businesses? Sean, what would you be doing? Well, I just need some help here, Sean. What should we be doing?
It's $1 billion answer, right? I think we're in that category now. If you can forecast this and predict, you're certainly well seated. Well, I think the good news is if they've been following along, there's a lot of threads in there that really talk about those opportunities. So how do we support companies from a cloud-based perspective? How do we get them optimized so that they have the right technologies at the individual level to be able to capture content, distribute content, collaborate with others? So as Julian just talked about, enterprises becoming their own broadcast systems. And that's not just a centralized capacity, that's a democratized capacity. So as we're seeing it even at Avixa, those watching my weekly videos, I'm doing those from home. I'm recording those myself. I'm doing my best to do some post-production on it. We have a great crew that can help me with it, but it's capturing and then pushing out in rapid fashion. Companies are going to be more and more asked to do that. So we need, as providers, to think, how do we support it? What kinds of things can we do? It's not just about the past of installing technology in a space. It's also connecting users with the right technology tools and business processes to allow them to now act in this kind of new normal. So that's sounding more and more like managed service contracts, AV as a service. It's sounding like smaller point deployments rather than large venue deployments. So maybe we're talking more volume and less, grand kind of big picture projects. Even some of the forecasts I've seen around events, if we go to more regionalized events or manufacturer B2B led events across the country, that sounds like a heck of a lot more trade show or conferences to actually sell your services to. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means big trade show operators have to think, that. But that's what we're doing. We're thinking about how can we facilitate and support those sorts of opportunities. So I mean, that's there's enough under there that you can kind of look at.
Well, from an Avixa point of view, it feels like absolutely there's a lot of things that we should all be looking at. Julian?
Well,
I don't want to give your trade secrets away, but...
well, one of the things, one of the areas, and I would say this, wouldn't I, is that I think we have an opportunity to do is recognize what I was saying earlier, that when people are now getting together back to the workplace, understanding what's happening in the workplace and how people are moving around workspace and what they're doing in that space is going to be really, really important. And I think a lot of these technology initiatives have failed in many ways to actually provide real illumination about really what's happening. And I think that's going to be a focus area, and it's certainly something I'm going to be focusing on, is how do we actually get in the business of buildings and motion, as well as conferencing and collaboration and all the rest of it, and how do we bring all these different elements together? Because as an enterprise, I don't just want to know how many people are using video tools and how many meetings I'm having and whether they start on time. I need to know where people are in the building, what they're actually doing, where I see large gatherings of people working really well, or where I actually see space that is underutilized and not providing value. So in many ways, like any kind of benefit of any kind of recession, people really have to actually look at their principal assets that they have and actually ask themselves a question: am I getting the best return of the assets that I have in the business? And what are the three biggest overheads that all organizations have? Well, first of all, it's people and how people can be productive. It's real estate and it's technology. Those are the three biggest overheads most organizations have. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a rebalancing. I actually think, again, technology is going to take a bigger piece of the pie in that rebalancing, but we have to work together to be able to provide solutions that integrate all of that stuff in a way that actually provides real value. So that's the secret sauce that I am actually cooking up in the kitchen right now, trying to figure out about how we actually go and address that market. But for the AV channel, that's a new opportunity that we haven't really addressed up until now. So again, in times of stress, in times of difficulty, comes great opportunity to innovate and rethink about what our value is and how we can help our customers.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in before Jon talks to you about liminal spaces, because that's Jon's favourite topic. When you talk, Julian, about where people are working and where they're most efficient working, we had a webinar a couple of weeks ago when one of our speakers talked about, you know, the water cooler moments, those spaces where people feel that they're empowered to work well, and they call those liminal spaces, and that's Jon's favourite subject now. But actually love your fact about, you know, we need to go back to experiences. Let's not just make going to the office or going to work a thing we do every day. Let's make it a really good experience for all of us. And your point about the data, if we can as an industry learn how we harness that data for our customer and help them interpret it in many different ways, and we talk about data being the new oil or the new business currency, then that is absolutely our job to do, most definitely. So like that.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
how many of us on this call right now is just yearning to want to get into an office with and actually spend time with work colleagues in a physical space at the same time? Every single one of us can't wait to return to that endeavor.
Just going for a beer would be great, Julian, at
Yeah,
this point
yeah.
outside. Yeah.
Emil, yeah.
Well, I have alcohol in most of my business meetings anyway. So. But remember 3 or 4 months ago when we were probably saying the complete opposite. Oh my God, I can't believe I've got another meeting where I'm going to have to sit in there and go through that mindless thing that we did last week for another thing. So we have to remind ourselves when we do return to work that these opportunities we have to get really fantastic, wonderful people together is an opportunity to do something different and an opportunity to create something that we didn't have before. Let's not go back to the monotony of just booking meetings for meeting's sakes and just going through mindless, endless presentations and with no action at the end of it. So I think coming to that, back to the particular point, there is going to be a massive emphasis, not just on how many meeting spaces and what technology has been doing, but the experience of what actually happens in that space.
So,
Yeah.
so I think, go, Sean.
Yeah, I was just thinking one way to think about this time too is it's sort of like pulling the factory offline. We have an opportunity to retool the factory so that the factory, in this case, workspaces, even entertainment spaces, those have an opportunity. Now, granted, they're facing serious demand issues right now, so revenues are scarcer. But as we return and it is slow reopen, there's an opportunity for many of these to take a hard look. How do we create more of these fluid spaces where we're actually able to flow between? So if anything, what the grand experiment is proving out right now is our ability to create more time, place independence. We can flow from space to space, and that's not just work to home, but eventually it will be work to entertainment, to exercise, to home. So there's this continuity of opportunity and experience that we're kind of testing out right now. So how we reimagine workspace to support that will be interesting, and companies have the opportunity, as Julian's talking about, to take a hard look at that and revisionist think, reimagine. So that being part of those conversations now is really important at reaching out to your companies to say, how are you rethinking? Because I want to be right there with you to plan that out, build it out, support it. Just one last thought before I turn it back over to you, John. Big data, clearly, as an analyst type, I am keenly interested in this as well. I think there's a huge opportunity for our industry to start to play a role in that data analytics, harnessing and interpreting for our companies things like utilization rates, access, downtimes, those sorts of things. How we can support that reimagining with that kind of data capture and processing will be important too. So building your skill sets, adding that to your company is an important consideration right now as you've got people on furlough and layoff. How do you retrain those that are appropriate to do so around some of these aspects will be key.
I mean, some great points there. I mean, and there's so many opportunities that I'm hearing about. I mean, we haven't touched on digital signage. You think of the retail environment, people are saying, well, I'm surely that'll die. Well, actually, wayfaring. Have you been into a supermarket now where there's a one-way system? They're having to put more signage in, agile signage, A-frames, things they can move about, get messaging in there quickly. So we've got to be agile and look at how we do things differently. What I'm hearing from you guys is let's not do just less of the same thing. Let's do things completely differently. Because if we sit there and wait for the new normal to come back, it won't be as we see it now. I love the thought about data, absolutely. There's products like Workspace Intelligence that are linked to WCD that's coming out soon as an easy way of really starting to build businesses around that. I love the idea of enterprises becoming a broadcaster, Julian. Absolutely right. And who better than experienced-led AV experts to help make that happen? Technology as a service has got to be high up there. I mean, I think with cash flow, both of you mentioned it, cash is king. From a channel, we've got a responsibility to help with that from a vendor through distribution into reseller. But I think the biggest cure for that one is to make sure we start spinning cash, through the end user base with TAS models. And we can then attach all those services that you're talking about, Sean. You can attach the value add services, not only just to sell the product, but sell the analytics, sell the support. And it used to be just sell maintenance contracts. But if you imagine you sell information and advice on how that information is going to change how people work, surely that's got to be something that if we come out of it with those sort of services, we're in a much stronger position. Jane, have you got any comments to make?
Well, I just like to say thank you, both of you. It was enlightening. I've made lots of notes, but I think overwhelmingly, it just reminds us that we live and we own that experience economy, and we can make this a great experience, and we can build on this. Out of the sort of the catastrophe that we're in at the moment, is we need to be great again and go back into that experience economy and own that. So, and that's one thing I learned at an ABEC a few years ago. So thank you, Victor, for that. That was. That's resonated and stayed with me. But everything I've heard today really does shout that we're in, when we come out of this, we need to be coming out stronger, working together, and enjoying the time when we meet over a beer, probably, Julian and Sean. And
a gin for you, Jane.
Gin for me. I'll change back to my gin bar soon. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you both.
Julian, you want to say something? I can see your.
No, I didn't ever think I was actually going to hear a version of MAGA, which was Make AV Great Again. But thank you, Jane, for that. But I think just building on that particular point, I think our destiny is in our hands. And if any of us are actually feeling like victims at the moment, please slap yourself around the face and start to actually reflect on some of the things that we've actually talked about here. Stay close to your customers. Look very optimistically about the things that we can do to make a change in how work is actually going to be done in the future. And I think every single one of us can play a role in that and have a positive impact, and hopefully also make the world. I know this sounds a little bit.
I'm going to start playing some music now, Julian.
But yeah, start the background music.
Music started.
I actually do believe that every single one of us can have an impact on making it a better world, not just a more productive and more efficient world. And if we think about the impact that video has actually had on the lives of countless hundreds of millions of people around the world right now, it's had a fundamental impact on keeping an element of human connection for so many people. We now need to take that message back into the business world and make sure that people really do now start adopting video as a way of maintaining and enhancing and improving that human connection.
On that note, great ending. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. As always, great information. Really, really appreciate that. Julian, fantastic, great view from a leading integrator. And thank you, Jane, for supporting this. And I will now say goodbye. Thank you very much. We look forward to the next Jon and Jane Chats to Somebody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.